Let us further refine our code. Let's move these two components, not logged in and the logged in component, into their own files. So let's go to the components folder over here, and you can either right click on it and select new file over here, or you can use the icon over here. So I'm creating a new file and I'm going to call it not logged in.js, and I'm also going to create a file called logged in.js. So now we have two new files called logged in.js and not logged in.js. Let us cut the code for not logged in and place it within the not logged in.js file. So now we have placed it here, and if we want this function to be available outside this file, we need to export it. So let us export it as export default not logged in. Let's do the same for the logged in function also. Let us cut the function and put it in the logged in.js file, and if we want this function to be available outside this file, we need to export it. But let us export it in a different syntax than what we did in not logged in.js. Here we exported the not logged in function as a default member. In logged in.js, let us export this logged in function as a non-default member. So to do that, we have to say export, and we have to open the curly braces and specify the name of the function. So this is the syntax to export a function as a non-default member. If we want to use logged in component and not logged in component within login.js, we'll have to import them now because those are in different files now. So let's write the import statements. Import not logged in is a default member, so our import statement will be not logged in from, and we can say dot to represent the current directory, and then slash, and then we select not logged in. And next, let us import logged in component now. Since we are exporting the logged in function as a non-default member using the curly braces, so we have to use the curly braces when we import also. So I have specified the curly braces, and within them I will specify logged in, and then we'll write from, and then single quotes dot to indicate the current directory, and then we select logged in and close the single quotes. Let me remove this extra spaces over here. So now login component is in its own file, logged in component is in its own file, not logged in component is in its own file also. Let us look at the output to confirm that our changes are working. As you can see, everything is working fine. What we have done here is we have placed all three of our components, logged in.js, login.js, and not logged in.js, directly within the components folder. In a real React project, we'll have a lot of components, so we'll need to have subfolders within the components folder and place related components into those subfolders. So let's create a subfolder within the components folder called login. So I'm going to click on this new folder icon, and I'm going to create a new folder called login, and I'm going to move these three files into this login folder. As you can see, the three files have been moved into the login folder within components folder. Let us create a second subfolder within the components folder. So I have the components folder selected here, and I'm going to click on the new folder icon, and let me call this new folder contacts. We won't be putting anything in this contacts folder for now. I have just created a second subfolder so that VS Code shows these subfolders more clearly. So now you can see that we have a components folder, and within that we have a contact subfolder, and also we have a login subfolder. And within the login subfolder, we have the three files loggedin.js, login.js, and not loggedin.js. Since we have moved the login.js file into a new subfolder called login, therefore we have to update our path within the import statement over here. Very often VS Code automatically adjusts the relative path within the import statements. For example, this change was made by VS Code and not by me. But once that happens, make sure to save the file, and then if we check the output, we can see that everything is still working. Very often VS Code will make the change, but we'll have to save the file for the change to take effect. If you observe within the login folder, we have a login.js file, And login.js file is our main component, which is ultimately used in app.js. There is a convention that we use in React projects where we call the main file within the folder as index.js. So let's change login.js to index.js. So I'm going to right click on the file and I'll select rename, and I'll rename that to index.js. So now we have index.js, and if we go to app.js, you can see that VS Code has automatically adjusted our relative file path for the login component. Let's save the file and look at the output. As you can see, everything is still working. Let's examine the relative path for the login component. The relative path says start from the current directory and look within the components subfolder, and within that look into the login folder. So this relative path over here is only specifying the login folder over here. We would actually expect that we would also specify the file name, which is index.js. So we'll specify index or index.js. So let's specify /index and look at the output. As you can see, the output is still the same and it's working. So whether we specify index at the end of the relative file path or not, it actually does not make a difference. So let's remove index again and let's look at the output once again, and you can see that everything is still working. So what's happening here is that in the relative file path, when we specify only up to the folder, then Webpack infers that it has to look for index.js within that folder. You can think of index.js file being the default file for the login folder. Let us do one final round of refactoring. Let us convert this function into an arrow function. So let us drop the function keyword and let us place an arrow between the parameters and the function body. And now we have an arrow function, and observe that we have only one line of code. So we can drop the curly braces, and we can also drop the return keyword and bring the line of code onto the same line as the function name. Although it doesn't look that good, I just wanted to show you that this can be done. Let's do the same for the logged in component also. Let's convert that into an arrow function. Const logged in equals the parameters which are empty and place an arrow. And in this case also we can drop the curly braces and the return keyword because we are actually returning only one expression over here. So let's do that. So I have dropped the curly braces as well as the return keyword. Let's adjust the indentation a little bit, and now we have converted this into an arrow function. Let's do the same for not logged in component as well. Let us drop the function keyword and place the arrow between the function parameters and the function body. Let's drop the curly braces and the return keyword. Let's remove the closing brace as well, and let's adjust the indentation just a little bit. And now we have converted this function also into an arrow function. Let's look at the output to confirm that everything is working. You can see that everything is still working fine. Let's go back to index.js within the login folder and send this to the next line. We can use the brackets to wrap around our return value. We have to remove the semicolon, and we can place the semicolon at the end. This last round of refactoring to convert everything to arrow functions, that is really not needed, but different developers use different styles. So you will see the arrow function syntax a lot as well as the traditional function syntax a lot. Hence, it's important to become familiar with both the syntax. So let's do a quick recap. The page that is loaded when we go to localhost 3000 is index.html within the public folder. And within index.html, there is a div with the ID root. During the build step, Webpack will inject index.js into index.html. So the code within index.js will run. And within index.js, we have the react dom.render function call, which renders the app component within the div element with the ID root. The div element with the ID root is within the index.html. And this is how the component app comes into the picture. In real world React projects, we'll have a lot of components. So we'll typically organize them using folders and subfolders. We have created a components folder, and we have also created a subfolder within it called login, and we have placed our function components within these new folders. When we place our function components in separate files, we'll need to export them like over here and over here, and we need to import them where they need to be used like over here. And we also discussed passing of props to our components. We have the login component that we created, and we passed in a prop over here with the value false, and we have an instance of the login component again over here, and we have passed in a different value to the prop over here. We have passed in a value of true over here. We discussed object destructuring while getting hold of the props that we want. Here we only wanted the is user logged in prop, so we used object destructuring for that. And we also discussed about the difference between React 16 and React 17 with respect to function components, whether this import statement is required or not. In React 17, we do not need this import statement if our function components are only using JSX. We have also used the React DevTools to look at the components that are being shown on this page. And lastly, for our components, we converted the traditional functions into arrow functions.